Hey, good evening. Granny's story time here, and we're going to continue with our reading of The Ice Monster by David Walliams and illustrated by Tony Ross. So let's find out what happens next and where Elsie, Dottie, and the mammoth end up. We're starting our reading from chapter 43, and we'll see how far we can go in 15 minutes. Just looks like a hairy elephant to me, remarked Titch in his musical Welsh accent. Elsie was pleased to finally meet the man that she had heard so much about. He was indeed short, not even taller than her. In fact, Dottie was as wide as he was tall. There was no denying that they made a very unusual match. However, all that mattered was that the pair glowed in each other's company. The animal was drinking water from a toilet stool in the Royal Hospital. Her trunk stretched down the U-bend. Well, she's not a hairy elephant, replied Elsie haughtily. She's a mammoth. I've never heard of such a thing, scoffed Titch. Well, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It's a prehistoric creature. Well, I'm pretty prehistoric myself, and I don't remember seeing an animal like this in the Welsh valleys as a boy. Well, that's because woolly mammoths died out thousands of years ago. And you just brought it back to life, did you? Said the man with a chuckle. Yes, replied Elsie. Actually, we did. That stopped the old soldier in his tracks, and he looked at Dottie for confirmation. And the lady just nodded her head. Well, what the ruddy hell is she doing here? He demanded. Well, I was rather hoping that you would help us hide her, replied Dottie. Me? Yes. Here? Yes. A great big furry elephant? Well, no, Elsie jumped in to correct him. She's a woolly mammoth. For how long? Oh, they lived for 50 years or more. 50? Well, this one's just a baby one. How big do they grow? Oh, about the size of a house. A house? And then there was the sound of a flush in the stall next door. Splish. An impossibly old man shuffled out wearing a nightshirt with a military cap and leaning on a cane, and the three looked at each other in panic. They had had no idea that the man had been in there the whole time. Morning, Colonel, said Titch. I'd leave that a minute if I were you, muttered the Colonel, wafting the air and actually making the smell worse, not better. Despite the stink, the three smiled back at him and said nothing, hoping he might shuffle on, but he didn't. The Colonel spotted the rear end of the mammoth sticking out of the stool next to his. He took a moment to admire it before commenting, Oh, my word, that quite is a remarkably large furry bottom. New boy, is he? It's a pet, replied Titch. A pet? Yes. Well, I could hate for you to miss your breakfast, Colonel. Now let me help you to the dining room. The private took the Colonel by the arm, but the old man was having none of it. Georgie, you can keep a pet. You can't keep a pet in the Royal Hospital, Private. It's against regulations. Well, I won't be here for long, replied Titch, shooting a look at Dottie. Oh, no more than 50 years, Colonel, sir, chipped in the lady. Elsie shook her head in disbelief at Dottie's stupidity. 50 years? Spluttered the Colonel. What kind of animal is this thing anyway? She is a woolly mammoth, replied Elsie. A what? Asked the elephant. We can't have a hairy elephant in here, shouted the man. Whatever is this country coming to? Get the blasted thing out. And with that, he whacked the mammoth's bottom with his stick. Thwack. And this would prove to be a very grave mistake. The next chapter is called Right Up My What's-It. No, shouted Elsie. Hoo, cried the animal, and she began bucking from side to side. Crunch! The wooden partitions between the toilets splintered into pieces as the mammoth struggled to get out. She lurched backwards, and the Colonel gave another thwack on her backside with the cane. Take that, you hairy-bottomed beast! Thwack! Stop! Cried Elsie. and she lurched at the Colonel and held onto his arm to stop him striking her friend again. Get your filthy hands off me, girl! The Mammoth was trying to turn herself around in the cramped toilet. Her tusks bashed into the toilet bowl. Crash, smashing it to pieces. Splurt. Water began gushing everywhere. Cried the Colonel. Oh, dearie me, more mess for me to clean up, remarked Dotty, never one to leave her job far behind. I'm going to be in big trouble with the matron, said Titch. She desperately tried to sit on the toilets at once to stop the water spraying across the ceiling. All that he achieved was a very wet bottom. Ah, he screamed as he was propelled into the air. The water has gone right up my what's-it! Eventually, the Mammoth managed to turn herself around and rip the cane right out of the man's hands with her trunk, and with all her might, she hurled the cane across the room. Whiz! It hit the window. Bang! It shattered it. Crack! Oh, cripes, not another breakage, muttered the lady. The water level in the room was rising rapidly. All four humans and the Mammoth were soon knee-deep in it. With all the noise, it was only a matter of time before someone came thumping on the door. Thud, thud, thud. What in heaven's name is happening in there? Came a female voice. Matron, hissed Titch, a flash of panic in his eyes, and then he raised his voice. Oh, it's all right, matron. Everything's under control. Just a minor problem with the flush. The Colonel, who'd only come in for a quiet morning poo, was having no more of this nonsense. Matron! They've got some great hairy elephant in here. Seeing things again, Colonel, she called out. See for yourself, woman, he called back. The matron pushed open the door. A 10,000-year-old woolly mammoth was staring back at her, but before she had time to scream, a rush of water swept her off her feet. Whoosh! And carried her down the corridor at speed. The other five all popped their heads out around the corner to watch her go. Oh, at least the floor is getting a good clean, remarked Dotty. Fortunately, there were many fantastic hiding places in the Royal Hospital. With Matron flushed away, Titch led Elsie, Dotty and Woolly down to the food storage room and slammed the door behind them. It's nice and chilly in here, said Titch. I'm sure your furry friend will feel right at home. The Mammoth did, and Elsie did too, for this was where all the food for the elderly soldiers were kept. The old boys obviously ate well, as there were giant jars of sweets and tins of all sorts of goodies like jam and honey and treacle, and to a girl who had lived her entire life under the shadow of hunger, the smell of food like this was the sweetest of perfumes. I'm starving, said Elsie. Please, may I have a tiny bit of jam? The little girl's eyes widened and her lip quivered. How could the grown-ups possibly say no? Oh, a little dollop can't hurt, said Dotty. No, agreed Titch. No one would miss a dollop. Raspberry or strawberry? Asked Dotty. I've never had either, replied the girl. What's nicer? Raspberry, I think. So raspberry it is then. Titch reached up and took down a jar of raspberry jam. Slowly he unscrewed the lid, and as the little girl licked her lips, however, before Elsie could dip her finger in, a huge furry trunk snaked around and slurped the lot. Slurp. What the? Exclaimed Elsie. Bad Mammoth, chided Dotty, slapping Woolly's trunk away. Whack. The Mammoth didn't even react. She was too busy being in a state of bliss at having tasted jam for the very first time. Oh, maybe I could try some strawberry, please, then, said Elsie. But as Titch unscrewed the lid, the Mammoth's trunk snaked its way around and slurped up every last bit. What? Exclaimed Elsie. Bad Mammoth, yelled Dotty. Not too loud, hissed Titch. Well, she is being very naughty. I know, but if Matron, and I know her, and she'll have all the soldiers out of their beds looking for the thing. She's not a thing, said Elsie. She's a mammoth. A mammoth thing then. Well, I don't know. Rumble. What was that? Thunder, guessed Dotty. Rumble. There it is again, exclaimed the girl. Is it in the pipes? Wondered Titch. Rumble. Oh, it's in the pipes, all right, said Elsie. Woolly's pipes. Listen! And all three fell silent. Rumble. It must be the jam, said Dotty, not agreeing with her tum-tum. Don't let her have any more. Oh, I won't, replied the girl, but I'm absolutely starving. You hold her trunk while I have a tiny bit of treacle. The treacle was in a huge tin, the size of a bucket, and Titch shook his head and lifted it down towards the girl as Dotty blocked the animal's view with her body and held tightly onto its trunk. Excitedly, the girl prized the lid off. Immediately, the sugary aroma whispered their way up to her nostrils. It was so sweet that for a moment the girl felt like she was floating. She dipped her finger in, and it felt smooth as silk. And just as she was about to scoop out a large dollop of treacle, she was shoved up against the shelves, causing all the tins and jars to come crashing to the floor. Bang, crash, wallop! The mammoth had surged forward to slope up every last bit of the sweet-smelling gloop, and Dotty was left holding onto the animal's trunk, so she was shoved into Titch, who was shoved into Elsie, and now there was a cloud of sugar and flour and tea whirling around the room, causing the non-three mammoths to cough and splutter. In amongst the chaos, the mammoth's trunk searched out every last morsel of food that had been splattered on the walls, floor, or ceiling, or indeed still floating through the air. The more they all tried to stop Woolly from devouring every last thing in sight, the faster she ate. Rumble, gurgle, fuzzle. Oh no, listen to her tummy again, said Dotty. I think we're heading for an explosion, predicted Titch. Slurp, 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 slurp. Oh dear, the girl gulped. You don't mean a bottom explosion, she asked. Oh, I do, young lady, replied Titch, and suddenly there was a loud knocking. Boom, boom, boom. This is the military police. Open up. We know you're in there, came a voice from the other side of the door. Shh, shushed Dotty. Nobody say a word. We heard that, came a voice. Yikes, exclaimed Dotty. We heard that too. Done and that. Dotty, shush, implored Elsie. We heard that as well. It wasn't me that time, called back Dotty. Grumble, drizzle, durgle. I fear a bottom explosion is coming, said the little old soldier at a terrifying speed. Boom, boom, boom! Open this door at once. Well, why don't we? Said Elsie with a smirk. You mean use its rear end as a cannon? Asked the little soldier. Exactly, replied the girl. Open the door and fire at will. Just coming, officers, called Dotty as she squeezed past the mammoth to get to the door. Quickly, madam, or we'll be forced to break down the door. Patience is a virtue, she called back. Tata grobble for Juzel. And by the sound of Woolly she was ready to blow, said Elsie. Dotty put her hand on the key and began to turn the lock. Just a jiffy, officers. Click went the key. The door is unlocked, Dotty called out. Kerabum! Munty munty! Ba-drizzle! The handle turned and slowly the door opened. The three shared a mischievous look as the mammoth straightened her back and lifted her tail. Fire! Shouted Titch, and the creature did. Grrr! The noise of Woolly's bottom burping sounded like a bear growling. It fired all over the military policemen, covering them from head to toe in sticky mammoth poop. The force of the bottom blast was so strong that it knocked them off their feet. The poor men were completely disoriented, as their eyes and noses were covered in the stuff. Let's make a run for it, said Elsie. Charge! cried Titch. The three guided the animal back out of the larder and began leading her down the corridor. You bring up the rear, Dotty, ordered the old soldier. Not on your Nelly, snapped the lady. I don't trust that bit, not one little bit. Where are we going? Asked Elsie. Well, away from the awful smell, replied Titch, as they hurried along the corridor and ran up the stairs to his ward. And that leaves us up to chapter 47. Thank you for listening to The Ice Monster by David Walliams. I hope you're really enjoying the story. A lot of toilet humor in this chapter because David Walliams is very famous for his farts, his bottom burps, his poo, and all things toilet related. Thank you for listening and see you next time.